The morning began like any other cold light slipping through the glass walls of Haven Light Studio, the kind that made everything look sharper, cleaner, almost unforgiving. The city was still shaking off its fog when I arrived. My heels echoed across the marble lobby, each step a quiet reminder that I had built this place from nothing. But the receptionist's voice stopped me mid-stride. "Miss Merrick, there's a new applicant waiting to be interviewed. She said she knows you personally." I barely looked up from my coffee. "Who?" The pause that followed was too long, the kind of pause that makes the air heavier than it should be. "She said her name is Sophia Merrick." I froze. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of the HVAC humming above and the faint tick of the clock behind the front desk. Sophia, my sister. The same sister who once looked me dead in the eye and called me a freeloader at a dinner table surrounded by people who laughed like it was entertainment. The same sister who hadn't spoken to me in 10 years, except for that single email that read, "Hope you're doing better. We all are." Now she was here, applying for a job. At my company. I didn't move for several seconds. The receptionist was watching me, unsure whether to say more. My throat tightened, but my voice came out steady. "Send her to the blue room. I'll handle it." I took the elevator up to the second floor. The mirrored walls threw my reflection back at me, sharp suit, clean lines, practiced calm. But beneath that, my pulse ran wild. I told myself to breathe, to remember who I was now, not who I used to be. The blue room was all glass and sunlight, intentionally designed that way. I'd chosen it years ago as the interview room because it revealed everything. No shadows to hide behind, no corners to escape into. She was already there when I walked in. Sophia stood by the window, clutching a black folder against her chest. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, her eyes more tired, framed by faint lines that hadn't been there before. She turned when she heard the door, and for the first time in over a decade our eyes met. "Elena," she said softly, as if tasting my name after years of silence. "Sophia." I closed the door behind me. The click echoed like a punctuation mark neither of us wanted to acknowledge. She tried to smile the same polite, polished smile she used when she wanted to look gracious, but it trembled at the edges. "I didn't expect you to be here personally," she said, her voice thinner than I remembered. "I run this company," I replied evenly. "I'm here for every decision." A flicker crossed her face, something between surprise and embarrassment. She looked around the room, at the architectural sketches pinned to the walls, at the soft lighting, the framed photographs of our finished projects. I could see it dawning on her how far I'd come. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "Thank you." The silence stretched, thick with everything we hadn't said. I sat across from her, notebook open, pen poised, pretending this was any other interview. "So," I began, "you're applying for the design assistant position." She nodded quickly, too quickly. "Yes, I've been doing some freelance work since last year, but I'm looking for something more stable now." Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. The polished confidence she used to wear like perfume was gone. In its place was something raw, desperation maybe, or humility learned too late. I looked at the folder she held. "May I?" She passed it to me. Inside were sketches surprisingly good, though inconsistent. But then I turned to the last page, and my breath caught. It was one of my designs, a kitchen concept I'd created years ago when I was just starting out. The exact same composition, down to the light fixture placement. Sophia's eyes darted to the page. "Oh, that one was just something I found online. I used it for inspiration." "Inspiration," I repeated softly, tracing my own lines with my finger. Her voice faltered. "I didn't mean..." I closed the folder gently. "It's fine. Let's continue." But it wasn't fine. The image of her stealing my work years ago, taking credit for the design of her own living room, flickered like static in my memory. And now, here she was again, holding a piece of my life, pretending it was hers. I leaned back in my chair. "Why do you want to work here, Sophia?" She hesitated. Her lips parted, but no sound came for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "Because I need to start over." Something in her tone broke the air between us. She wasn't lying, not entirely. There was defeat in her voice, something I'd never heard before. I glanced at her hands. No wedding ring, just faint tan lines where one used to be. Her gaze drifted to the window. "I made a lot of mistakes," she murmured. "I just need someone to give me a chance." I felt the words cut through the years of silence like smoke through glass. For a moment, I saw her not as the sister who mocked me, but as a woman who had fallen hard enough to realize gravity existed. But empathy didn't erase memory. And memory didn't forget the sting of humiliation, or the way her voice once carried across the table, Elena just lives off Dad's money. She doesn't do anything real. I looked down at the folder again, at her trembling signature on the last page. Then I closed it, calm and deliberate. I'll have HR review your application, I said quietly. You'll hear from us soon. Her shoulders sagged in visible relief. Thank you, she whispered. I stood, extending my hand. She hesitated before taking it. Her skin was cold, her grip weak. Good luck, Sophia. She nodded, gathering her folder, avoiding my eyes. When she left the room, I exhaled a slow, shaking breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Through the glass walls, I watched her walk down the corridor, smaller than I remembered, swallowed by the light. My reflection lingered against the glass beside hers, two silhouettes moving in opposite directions. She once called me a freeloader. Now she was standing in line, waiting for my approval. And as the elevator doors closed behind her, I realized the strangest thing. I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. After Sophia left that morning, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the faint outline of her fingerprints on the glass table. The sunlight had shifted by then, sliding slowly across the room until it struck the photo on my shelf, a faded picture from our childhood, the two of us sitting on the front steps of our old house in Waverly, Illinois. Sophia was smiling, radiant even at 9 years old, her blonde hair catching the light like it was spun from gold. I was next to her, smaller, darker, my knees scraped, clutching a half-broken doll I'd found in a thrift store bin. Our mother used to say we were night and day. She meant it as a compliment for Sophia and an explanation for me. The house we grew up in was narrow and gray, its siding peeling in strips like paper curling from an old book. The porch creaked, and the air always smelled faintly of laundry detergent and our mother's gardenia perfume. Inside, everything was arranged for Sophia's comfort lace curtains she'd chosen, picture frames of her piano recitals, trophies lined neatly on the mantel. My things fit into one small drawer at the end of the hallway. I remember Sunday mornings the clearest. Our mother, Margaret, would hum as she ironed Sophia's dresses lilac, mint, butter yellow, while I sat on the floor, waiting for her to hand me the ones Sophia had outgrown. Sometimes they still smelled faintly of perfume, and I'd wear them anyway, pretending I was part of the same picture everyone else seemed to see. Let your sister go first, Elena, she'd say whenever there was cake, or new shoes, or attention to give. Sophia's older. Be patient. Patience that was supposed to be my virtue. Sophia was the star, and I was the placeholder between her scenes. Even our meals told the story. Sophia's plate always looked fuller, her glass of milk always filled to the brim. When I pointed it out once, my mother laughed and said, "Oh, you're imagining things, dear. Sophia's just got a bigger appetite." It wasn't about appetite, it was about worth. The first real memory that really stung happened when I was 8. I'd made a birthday card for our father out of construction paper, cutting the edges into clumsy hearts. I'd stayed up past bedtime, coloring it carefully by the light of my flashlight. At breakfast, I handed it to him shyly. He smiled, but before he could say anything, my mother said, "Oh, how sweet, but look what Sophia made." Sophia's card was perfect store-bought, of course with a crisp envelope and a neat little bow. Everyone cooed over it. Mine disappeared under a stack of newspapers. That night I found it in the trash, bent in half. I never told anyone I saw it there. Sophia was beautiful, confident, the kind of girl who drew people like sunlight draws dust. She danced at school assemblies, always center stage. I painted scenery behind the curtain, careful not to spill. When relatives came over, they'd say, "Sophia's going places. What about you, Elena?" And my mother would smile tightly and say, "Elena helps out. She's the quiet one." Quiet, invisibly, background. I learned early that love in our house had rules. Rule 1, be useful, not noticed. Rule 2, never expect fairness, it's a privilege, not a right. Rule 3, don't make your sister look bad. I broke all 3 eventually, though not by choice. When I was 13, our father lost his job at the mill, and the tension at home thickened like fog. Money grew tight, but you wouldn't know it from Sophia's world. She still got piano lessons, new clothes for homecoming, fresh haircuts every other month. I started babysitting the neighbors' kids, saving every dollar I could. One afternoon, I came home carrying a small box, my first pair of art supplies I'd bought with my own money. Brushes, paints, a sketchbook. The smell of the paper made me dizzy with excitement. Sophia took one look at it and said, "That's a waste. You can't even draw people right." Our mother didn't correct her. She just shrugged. "She's right, dear. You don't have Sophia's eye for presentation." I remember how my cheeks burned. I locked myself in my room and drew until my fingers cramped faces, flowers, rooms I wished I could live in. It was the only place I could breathe without comparison hanging over me like a shadow. Years later, that sketchbook would become the foundation of my career, but back then, it was just paper soaked with the ache of wanting to be seen. Birthdays came and went. Sophia's were events, guests, cakes from the good bakery in town, a new dress every time. Mine were quiet dinners where someone always forgot to buy candles. Once, I blew out the flame of a single tea light my father found in the drawer. I remember him looking at me, eyes tired but soft, whispering, "You've got something special, Ellie. Don't let them take that from you." He was the only one who ever said that. Our mother adored Sophia for her shine. But my father he loved quietly, awkwardly, the way people do when they're not sure they're allowed. I used to watch from the doorway as he and Sophia danced in the living room after dinner, her laughter ringing against the walls. Then he'd see me, standing there barefoot, and guilt would flicker in his eyes. "Next song's yours," he'd promise. But the song always ended too soon. By the time we were adults, the script had already been written. Sophia went to college on a scholarship, majored in marketing, and came home for holidays wearing heels and confidence. I stayed behind, taking community classes, working part-time at a stationery shop. At family dinners, she'd dominate every conversation, her new apartment, her promotions, her vacations. And every time I tried to speak, someone would cut me off. "Oh, Sophia, show us the photos from that gala." I'd smile, pretending it didn't sting. But deep down, the truth festered that no matter what I did, I'd always be the supporting act in her performance. Years later, when she called me a freeloader, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was simply the loudest echo of everything I'd already been told in quieter ways. Every laugh at my expense, every hand me down, every "be patient," it all led to that word. Freeloader. The word that took everything invisible inside me and dragged it into the light. I thought I'd buried that version of myself long ago, the girl who watched her sister get everything she'd been taught not to want. But as I sat in my office that morning, staring at her name on the application form, I realized something. That girl never disappeared. She just learned to build her own house. And this time, there would be no room for comparisons. When people talk about loneliness, they make it sound poetic like rain on a window, or the last leaf clinging to a branch. But the kind I knew wasn't beautiful. It was heavy. It was the sound of my own breath in a room that never answered back. After college, I moved to the city, a small studio above a laundromat that smelled perpetually of detergent and damp heat. The wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the radiator hissed like it was angry to be alive. I worked wherever I could, coffee shops, copy centers, temp jobs that ended before I could memorize anyone's name. Every paycheck vanished on rent and instant noodles. Every phone call from home came with advice I hadn't asked for. "You need to find stability, Elena," my mother would say. "You're too smart to be wasting your time on hobbies," Sophia would add, laughing in the background. Hobbies. That's what they called my art, my designs, my nights sketching floor plans on the backs of receipts. Sometimes I'd sit by the window, sketchbook balanced on my knees, watching the traffic lights change below. I'd imagine each car carrying someone who mattered, someone with a destination that didn't feel borrowed. But when the lights went out, all that was left was the echo of my own small existence. The last time I went home for Christmas was the year everything cracked open. I'd almost skipped it, but my father called, his voice fragile, saying, "Just come, Ellie, it'll be good for everyone." So I did. I took the bus back to Waverly, 7 hours of cold glass and strangers' conversations. The town looked smaller than I remembered, the way childhood homes often do. When I stepped inside, everything was the same. The smell of cinnamon candles, the hum of the old refrigerator, and my mother's voice calling out instructions before she even looked at me. Sophia arrived later that evening, in a sleek coat, her laughter filling the house before she even crossed the threshold. Her husband, Nathan, followed, tall, polished, carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my month's rent. Dinner was set with the same porcelain plates we'd grown up with, the ones I was never allowed to touch as a kid. I watched Sophia glide around the room like it all still belonged to her. When we finally sat, conversation flowed easily for everyone else. Nathan talked about their trip to Italy. My mother asked about their new house. Sophia bragged about her promotion. No one asked me about my life. I ate in silence, nodding when required, smiling when appropriate. My father glanced at me once or twice, his eyes apologetic but powerless. Then it happened. Sophia leaned back, swirling her wine, and said, "Mom, you know what's funny? Elena still doesn't have a real job." The words dropped like glass shattering on tile. I blinked, unsure I'd heard her right. Excuse me? She smiled that same polite, dangerous smile. Well, you know what I mean. You're still freeloading off Dad, aren't you? He's always sending you money. A soft chuckle rippled around the table. My mother didn't say anything. Nathan laughed outright. Even my father tried to change the subject, but his voice faltered. I felt the blood rush to my face. That's not true, I said quietly. Sophia tilted her head, pretending innocence. Oh, come on, Elena. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Some people just take longer to find their path. Laughter again. Light, cruel, careless. Something inside me cracked not loudly, but cleanly, like ice breaking underfoot. I stood up so suddenly my chair scraped against the floor. The sound silenced everyone. I'm not a freeloader, I said. And I don't need Dad's money. Sophia shrugged. Then what do you need, Elena? The question wasn't a question, it was a blade. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands were trembling. My father started to say something, but I was already walking away through the kitchen, out the back door, into the December air that cut like glass. The snow was falling in slow, deliberate flakes, catching in my hair as I walked down the driveway. The sound of their laughter still echoed behind me, muffled by the walls I'd spent my whole life trying to belong within. I didn't go back inside. I walked to the old motel near the highway, paid cash for a room, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the floral curtains that looked like they hadn't moved since the 80 seconds. And then I broke. I cried until my chest ached, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere ancient, not the eyes, not the throat, but the bones. Every word, every dismissal, every comparison flooded back. Let your sister go first. She's older. Be patient. You're lucky to have what you get. I'd swallowed them all for years, and now they came pouring out, raw and sour. I remember whispering to the empty room, maybe they're right. Maybe I really was nothing. Maybe all my dreams were just paper castles waiting for rain. The clock on the nightstand blinked past midnight, its red digits burning into my skull. I pressed a pillow over my face to muffle the sobs. The heater rattled in the corner, keeping rhythm with my shaking breath. For the first time in my life, I thought about giving up. Not in a dramatic way, not with any plan or statement, just a quiet surrender. A desire to stop trying, to stop hurting, to disappear into the kind of nothing they'd always said I was. But then my eyes fell on my bag half open, sketchbook peeking out, the one thing I'd carried everywhere, even when I had nothing else. I reached for it, hands still shaking, and flipped through the pages. Lines, colors, rough ideas for spaces that didn't exist yet, a kitchen that felt like sunlight, a room with windows big enough to make people breathe easier. They weren't just drawings. They were proof that I saw things differently, that even if no one believed in me, I had vision. I held the sketchbook to my chest like a heartbeat. The tears kept coming, but softer now, the kind that cleanse instead of drown. Somewhere deep down, a small, stubborn voice whispered, "You are not done." I didn't sleep that night. I just watched the snow fall through the thin motel window, covering everything, the roads, the roofs, the memories. In the morning, when the first light touched the horizon, I got up, wiped my face, and packed my bag. I didn't know what I was walking toward, but I knew I couldn't go back. That night had stripped me of everything: pride, illusion, belonging. But it also left me with something pure. Silence. And in that silence, a seed. The kind that only grows when you have nothing left to lose. The morning after that Christmas, I didn't go back to my mother's house. I took the first bus out of Waverly, watching the frozen fields blur past the window like the last pages of a story I didn't want to read anymore. The air inside the bus smelled faintly of diesel and cheap coffee, and the seats were sticky with old chewing gum. I didn't care. It was freedom, not glamorous, not grand, but mine. When I got back to the city, I had $46 left in my account. My landlord had already taped a warning notice to my door. The radiator was still broken, and the air inside my apartment hung cold and metallic. For days I didn't leave. I stayed in bed, numb, replaying Sophia's words over and over: freeloader, freeloading, freeloader. They didn't just echo. They nested, made a home inside my chest. But grief has an expiration date, and so does humiliation. Eventually, the pain became background noise. One afternoon, as I sat by the window wrapped in a blanket, sketchbook open, I realized I could either let her be right or make her eat those words. And that thought alone, small, sharp, dangerous, changed everything. It started with a Craigslist ad. Assistant needed for independent interior designer. Small projects, minimal pay, must have passion. The word passion made me laugh. Passion doesn't pay rent. But I applied anyway. That's how I met Noah Reed. He was 10 years older than me, tall, unshaven, always smelling faintly of turpentine and peppermint gum. His office was a converted attic space, full of mismatched chairs and sketches taped to the walls. He'd been working as a designer for a decade but was stuck a genius in theory, a disaster in business. He hired me the next day. My job was simple: organize, assist, sketch, and keep the coffee flowing. I did all that and more. Noah had talent but no order. I had hunger but no connections. Together, we balanced the equation. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. When I presented my first concept, a small cafe redesign, Noah actually listened. He leaned over the sketch, nodding, tracing the lines with his finger. "You've got an eye," he said. No one had ever said that to me before. Not once. I smiled shyly. "I just see what feels right." He grinned. "Then keep seeing." We worked side by side for months, taking every small job we could get. Bakeries, rental apartments, outdated office lobbies. The pay was terrible, but the experience was gold. I learned to stretch a dollar until it screamed. I learned to negotiate with suppliers, soothe anxious clients, and paint walls at 2 a.m. because hiring a crew was too expensive. It was exhausting. It was relentless. And I loved every second of it. When I got home each night, I'd collapse on my couch, a thrift store find with a spring that stabbed through the fabric, and stare at the ceiling, smiling. For the first time, I was building something that no one could take credit for. Then came the betrayal, the one that burned brighter than all the rest. Sophia called me out of the blue one afternoon. Her voice was cheerful, casual, like the past had never happened. "Elena, I've been thinking about redecorating our house. Nathan wants something more modern." And I told him, "My sister's an artist. She can help." The words made me freeze. My mind flickered through all the old wounds, but I told myself this could be different. Maybe she was extending an olive branch. Maybe she meant it. Against my better judgment, I agreed. For weeks, I worked on her home, every detail, every color, every piece chosen with care. I designed the living room around the idea of forgiveness, warm tones, open light, soft textures. It wasn't just about furniture. It was about healing something invisible. When it was done, it looked beautiful. She said she loved it. She hugged me. She even said, "You've really grown, Elena." For the first time in years, I believed her. But a month later, I saw photos of her house featured in a local design magazine. The headline read, "Sophia Marek's stunning home makeover designed by the homeowner herself." I stared at the page, reading and rereading the caption, my chest tightening with every line. She'd used my words, my descriptions, my design philosophy, balance between warmth and structure, spaces that breathe, all of it. And there, smiling in front of my work, was Sophia, radiant, successful, and credited for everything I'd done. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't call her. I sat in silence, the magazine spread open on my lap, and realized I'd reached the end of the line. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every moment I'd been told to wait, to shrink, to be patient while someone else took the light. I wasn't patient anymore. I went to Noah the next morning and told him I wanted to start something new, something of our own. He looked skeptical. "Elena, we don't have the capital." "We have talent," I said, "and we have hunger. That's enough." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "What would we call it?" I smiled. "Havenlight, because people deserve to feel safe in the spaces they live in." The first months were brutal. We worked out of my apartment, using a folding table as our desk. Clients were rare, bills were constant. I lived off peanut butter sandwiches and black coffee. But every time I felt like quitting, I thought of that magazine cover, Sophia's smile, my work under her name, and it fueled me like fire. Slowly, things began to shift. A small cafe downtown hired us after I redesigned their seating plan for free. Word spread. Then came an art gallery, then a boutique hotel lobby. One project led to another. Noah handled the negotiations. I handled the design. We were unstoppable, scrappy, fearless, and hungry for more. By the end of the second year, Havenlight Studio was no longer an idea. It was a brand. We rented a small office, one with big windows and paint that didn't peel. I hung our first check in a frame on the wall, next to the blueprint of our first official design. When I looked at it, I saw more than success. I saw survival. 3 years later, I was sitting in a conference room overlooking the Chicago River, presenting to investors who actually wanted to hear my ideas. My name was on the contracts now: Elena Marek, founder and creative director. The same girl who once drew rooms in a motel notebook now designed them for clients who flew in from other states. I didn't owe that to luck, or to family, or to forgiveness. I owed it to that night in the motel, to the moment I decided I'd rather be alone and alive than loved and small. There's a line I'll never forget. Noah said it to me the day we landed our first six-figure contract. "You know," he said, smiling, "for someone who was once called a freeloader, you sure built a lot of homes for other people." I laughed, then really laughed, the kind that comes from a wound finally closing. But I also knew something he didn't. I wasn't building homes for other people. I was building the one I'd always needed. By the time I turned 38, the world that once ignored me had started to notice. The name Havenlight no longer sounded like a dream scribbled on the corner of a notebook. It carried weight. It appeared in glossy magazines, whispered at dinner parties, printed on the invitations of architectural galas. And there I was, walking through spaces I had once only imagined, marble floors echoing beneath my heels, chandeliers blooming above me like captured stars. Every step I took felt like defiance wrapped in grace. The first project that truly changed everything was the Calder residence, a 3-story glass and stone home overlooking Lake Michigan. The Calders were old Chicago money, the kind of family that had portraits older than the city itself. They hired me after firing 2 other designers who didn't understand their vision. I understood perfectly. They didn't want design. They wanted someone who could translate emotion into structure. For weeks, I lived inside that project, studying the way the morning light crawled across the marble, how the lake mist softened the glass walls at dawn. I obsessed over textures, sounds, how the air should feel. When the home was finally unveiled, the room went silent. Mrs. Calder's hand flew to her chest. "It feels alive," she whispered. That was the moment everything changed. By the end of the year, Havenlight Studio had tripled its staff. We were no longer just an interior design firm, we were storytellers of space. I was invited to speak at conferences. Magazines called me the empathic architect. Awards followed glossy plaques that glimmered under soft track lights in our new downtown office. But my favorite moments weren't the interviews or the galas. They were the quiet mornings when I'd arrive before everyone else, unlock the glass doors, and let the sunlight spill across the floor. Because that light, that peace, it was mine. Hard-earned, undiluted, unborrowed. My home became a reflection of that peace. A penthouse apartment on the 21st floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city skyline. Every corner was curated, not extravagant, but intentional. There was warmth in the oak panels, serenity in the cream tones. A large fig tree stood by the window, its leaves catching the sunrise like a prayer. Sometimes I'd sit on the couch, barefoot, coffee in hand, and think of the old motel room, the one that smelled of dust and secondhand dreams. I'd remember how small I felt there, how my reflection in the cracked mirror had looked like a stranger's. And then I'd look around now at the home I'd built, at the quiet luxury that hummed through the air, and I'd smile. Not out of pride, out of survival. When Forbes' Home featured me as one of the top 10 designers shaping modern America, I almost didn't agree to the photo shoot. I'd never been comfortable being the face of anything. But Noah insisted. "It's time people saw you, Elena," he said. So I let them photograph me in my studio light pouring through tall arched windows, sketches pinned to the walls behind me. They asked me about my process, my inspirations. I told them the truth. I build spaces for people who never felt like they belonged anywhere. I build homes for the invisible. The interviewer blinked, then smiled softly. "That's poetic." Maybe, but it was also personal. Because every design I created was a love letter to the girl I once was, the girl who stood outside her family's laughter, holding paper plates, pretending not to notice there wasn't a seat for her. That same year, I hosted Havenlight's 5th anniversary gala. It was held in one of the buildings we'd redesigned, an old opera house turned modern event space, glass balconies glinting under chandeliers the size of constellations. The room shimmered with silk gowns and tailored suits. Waiters carried trays of champagne. A string quartet played near the fountain, the music rippling through the air like something golden. Noah stood beside me, raising his glass. "We made it," he said. I smiled, my eyes scanning the crowd, investors, clients, designers, even journalists. And then, for the briefest second, I saw her. Sophia. She stood near the entrance, hesitating, her expression unreadable. I blinked and she was gone. Maybe it was my imagination. Or maybe fate was warning me that old ghosts never stay buried. Still, that night was mine. People congratulated me, toasted me, called me visionary. But what I remember most vividly wasn't the applause or the flash of cameras, it was stepping outside, onto the balcony overlooking the lake. The air was cool, clean, and filled with the sound of the city's heartbeat below. I stood there for a long time, watching the reflection of the lights shimmer across the water, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was chasing something. I was arriving. That's when it hit me that success isn't loud. It's not the applause or the headlines. It's the silence that follows when you finally stop needing to prove anything. One morning, a few months later, my assistant handed me a new stack of resumes. We were hiring for several positions: junior designers, administrative staff, project coordinators. I flipped through them casually, signing off on shortlists. Then my hand stopped. There it was. A familiar name. Sofia Marek. Under desired position, it read, Client Relations Assistant. For a moment, I didn't breathe. The room blurred around me. There was her photo, polished, professional, but with a faint shadow behind her eyes, the kind of tiredness success can't hide. I placed the paper gently on the desk and stared at it. The irony wasn't lost on me. The sister who once called me a freeloader was now applying to my company. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity. What I felt was something far quieter, a sense of full-circle calm, the kind that comes when the past finally returns, not as pain, but as proof. That night, I went home and poured myself a glass of wine. The city lights blinked outside like distant memories. On my kitchen counter sat a single envelope, her resume, printed and folded. I ran my fingers across the paper, tracing her name. Once, she had been the sun, and I the shadow. Now, I was the horizon, vast, self-lit, untouchable. I didn't know yet if I'd call her in for the interview. All I knew was that I wasn't the girl she left behind anymore. The power had shifted not in noise or revenge, but in quiet, irrevocable truth. The morning Sophia came in for her interview, the city was drenched in late autumn rain. Gray light pressed against the windows of IEveryone studio, soft and cold, like the ghost of a memory refusing to fade. I was in my office when my assistant knocked. Miss Merrick, your 10 a.m. is here. I looked up from the project proposal in front of me. Who? She hesitated. Sophia Merrick. The sound of that name, my name, split and mirrored, stirred the air like dust in sunlight. For a heartbeat, I said nothing. Then I nodded. Send her in. The door opened slowly, as if she was unsure whether to enter. When she finally did, she looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. The sister who used to command rooms with laughter and charm now seemed swallowed by her own hesitation. Her once glossy hair was pulled back too tightly. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the strap of her handbag. Her eyes, though they were still Sophia's, sharp, assessing, flickering with that familiar edge of pride. Elena, she said softly, forcing a smile. It's been a while. Yes, I said. It has. For a moment, silence filled the room. Only the rain spoke, tapping gently against the window like a metronome marking the rhythm of our history. She sat down across from me. The same chair where investors, clients, and designers had all sat, now occupied by the woman who once told me I was nothing. I folded my hands on the desk. So, I said, my voice steady. You're applying for client relations assistant. She nodded quickly. Yes, I've been following IEveryone for a while now. Your work is... She paused, her voice catching slightly. Beautiful, Elena. Truly. I'm proud of you. The word proud landed between us like a misplaced relic. It didn't belong here. Thank you, I said simply. She straightened, forcing composure. I know things between us were complicated, but I'm looking for a fresh start. Nathan's business hasn't been doing well since the market crash. I need something steady, something real. I could feel her trying to sound casual, but desperation has a scent faint, metallic, and impossible to hide. I watched her carefully. I see. And why IEveryone? Her eyes flicked around the room, the modern wood panels, the framed magazine covers, the subtle elegance that whispered success without apology. Because it's yours, she said finally, and because I know what you're capable of. I thought maybe... Her voice faltered. Maybe you'd give me a chance. A flicker of the past pulsed through me, 1,000 small humiliations disguised as family dinners. Her laughter when I said I wanted to design for a living. Her voice calling me freeloader. Her photo smiling from that magazine in my work, under her name. For years, I had imagined this moment, what I'd say, how I'd deliver the final blow. But standing here now, the fantasy felt hollow. Revenge doesn't taste sweet when the person you're facing has already swallowed enough bitterness of their own. I leaned back in my chair. You know, I said quietly, when you called me a freeloader, I believed you. For a long time. She looked up sharply, color draining from her face. I worked nights, I continued, saved every penny, built this place from scratch. And I did it because of that word. You planted it in me like a curse, but it grew into a tree instead. Sophia's lips trembled. Elena, I raised a hand gently, not to silence her, but to steady the air between us. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because you need to know I don't need your apology. I outgrew the part of me that needed your approval. She blinked hard, her mascara smudging at the corners. I was jealous, she whispered. That's the truth. You were always softer, more creative. I didn't understand it. Mom and Dad didn't either. They thought strength meant control, not compassion. I just copied what I saw. Her voice broke. And now look at me. I stayed silent. Not out of cruelty, out of something closer to peace. After a long pause, she reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. I brought this, she said, her voice trembling. She unfolded the paper carefully, revealing an old photograph, one I hadn't seen in decades. It was the two of us, maybe 10 and 12 years old, sitting in front of our childhood home. I was holding a drawing pad. She was holding a trophy. I remembered the day. She'd won a spelling bee. I'd drawn our mother's garden from memory. She'd gotten applause. I'd gotten silence. Sophia set the photo on my desk. I found it in Mom's attic. I thought you should have it. The rain outside had stopped. A pale light began to slip through the clouds, landing softly on the photograph, two little girls frozen in time, long before resentment built its walls. I traced my younger self with a finger. We were so small, I murmured. Sophia nodded. I didn't know how much I hurt you. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the rival, not the favorite, not the betrayer, just a woman who had spent years pretending to be fine. Finally, I stood, walked to the window. The city below shimmered in fresh rain. You want a position here, I said quietly. And you're qualified. But I need to be clear, I don't hire family out of obligation. I hire people who understand what Havenlight stands for. She swallowed hard. And what's that? I turned, meeting her eyes. Grace. Not perfection, not pride. Grace for the people who had none left, including ourselves. She nodded slowly, tears glistening. Then I'll earn it. I smiled faintly. We'll see. When she left, I stayed in my office for a long time, staring at the photograph still lying on my desk. The light outside turned golden that hour when the city shifts from gray to fire. Noah walked in a few minutes later, glancing at the picture. Was that her? I nodded. He studied my face. How do you feel? I exhaled slowly. Lighter, I said. Like I just set down something I've been carrying too long. He smiled. That's what closure looks like, you know. Maybe it was. But to me, it felt more like reclamation, not of victory, but of peace. That evening, as I was packing up, my assistant returned. Miss Merrick, should I schedule a second interview for Miss Sophia? I looked out the window, at the skyline blazing against the dusk. Yes, I said finally. Schedule it. The assistant nodded and left. I stood there, alone, as night fell, the photograph still on my desk, the rain beginning again in soft, forgiving whispers. And in that sound, the rain, the city, the pulse of everything I had built, I heard something I hadn't in years. Not anger. Not pain. But the sound of forgiveness, quiet, unforced, and entirely mine. Winter came early that year. The city was blanketed in slow, heavy snow, the kind that quiets everything, turning even the noise of traffic into a kind of hush. From my office window, the river looked like a strip of glass, still and gray, holding its breath under the sky. I'd stayed late again, long after the others had gone home. The studio lights glowed like warm stars against the dark. It was peaceful here, the kind of peace that feels earned, not given. On my desk, the old photograph of Sophia and me remained, its edges curling slightly. I hadn't framed it. I liked the imperfection of it, the creases, the faded corners. It reminded me that even beautiful things could survive rough handling. Sophia had been working at Havenlight for 3 months now. At first I wasn't sure how it would go. There was tension, of course, invisible but palpable. We spoke formally, politely, careful not to touch the edges of the past. But something shifted as the weeks passed. She came in early, stayed late, learned fast. Clients liked her calm voice and steady professionalism. She didn't try to impress anyone, she just worked, quietly, steadily. One evening, I passed her office and saw her sitting there alone, reviewing client notes under the soft glow of her desk lamp. Her posture was tired, but her face was peaceful. For the first time, she looked like someone who had stopped running from herself. In that moment, I realized that maybe this slow rebuilding, this quiet respect was the truest form of forgiveness there was. A few days before Christmas, we closed early for the holidays. Snow was falling hard that afternoon, thick flakes swirling outside the tall windows. I was gathering my things when Sophia knocked softly on my door. She stepped in, holding a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with a ribbon. "I didn't know what to get you," she said awkwardly, "but I wanted to say thank you." I took the box, surprised. It was light, small enough to fit in my palm. "Can I open it?" I asked. She nodded. Inside was a single brass key attached to a leather tag. On the tag, engraved in small letters, were the words, "Our Beginning." Sophia's eyes glistened. "It's a spare to Mom and Dad's old house. Nathan and I sold it last month, but before we did, I thought you might want to see it one last time. Everything's empty now, just walls and echoes." My throat tightened. "You kept a key?" She nodded. "I didn't know why, but now I think it's yours." For a long time, I couldn't speak. The snow outside blurred the skyline until the world looked washed clean. I reached across the desk and took her hand. "Thank you," I said simply. She smiled, a real one this time, not polished, not practiced, just human. A week later, I drove out to that house. It stood quiet under the weight of the snow, the porch sagging a little, the paint peeling, the garden long overgrown. But it was still there, stubbornly standing against the wind. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and time. The rooms were empty, no laughter, no furniture, no echoes of arguments or celebrations. Just the bones of what once was. I walked through slowly, touching the door frames, the wallpaper edges, the windowsills we once leaned on as children. In the living room, sunlight cut through a broken blind, falling in strips across the old wooden floor. I stood there, letting the light fall on my face. And I realized I didn't hate this house anymore. I didn't hate what it represented. It wasn't a tomb. It was a beginning. Every wall that had once closed me out had also taught me how to build new ones, stronger, kinder, mine. I walked to the fireplace and placed the key on the mantel, leaving it there like an offering to everything that had shaped me, the pain, the envy, the silence, the strength. Then I turned and left, closing the door gently behind me. The next morning, I returned to the studio early. The sunrise was soft pink over the river, melting the last traces of snow on the rooftops. As I stood by the window with my coffee, I thought about the word freeloader, the one that once haunted me. It no longer carried weight. It was just a word, belonging to a story that had already ended. I realized something I wish I could have told my younger self. You don't have to prove your worth to the people who can't see it. You just have to keep building until your light is impossible to ignore. That evening, the studio hosted its annual winter celebration. It wasn't a gala, just a gathering of staff, friends, and clients. The room buzzed with warmth and laughter. Noah gave a toast, his glass catching the golden light. "To Havenlight," he said, "to the spaces we build and the people who teach us how to live in them." Everyone clinked glasses. I looked around the room at the faces I'd come to love, at Sophia laughing softly with one of the junior designers, and felt something settle inside me. It wasn't victory. It wasn't pride. It was peace. Later, when the party ended and the last guest had gone, I stepped outside onto the terrace. The snow had started again, falling slow and quiet over the river. The city lights shimmered through the flakes, soft and golden. I stood there for a long time, breathing it in the cold air, the distant hum of life, the sound of my own heart steady and sure. Somewhere behind me, Sophia was turning off the last light in the studio. I heard her footsteps pause at the door. "Good night, Elena," she said softly. I turned, smiling. "Good night, Sophia." Our eyes met, no bitterness, no rivalry, just two women who had finally found their way home. As I walked back inside, I passed the photograph still on my desk, the two little girls smiling under the sundae. For the first time, I didn't see what we lost. I saw what we survived. I reached out, straightened the photo, and whispered, "We made it." The snow outside continued to fall, slow and forgiving, wrapping the city in white, as if the world itself had decided to let go of everything it once held against us. And in that quiet, as the lights dimmed and the river shimmered below, I finally understood. Family isn't about who hurt you, or who left you behind. It's about who stays and who learns to see you clearly, even after all the years of blindness. And sometimes, that person is you. Thank you so much for watching and spending your time with me today. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world, it's what keeps me creating more stories like this. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new episode, and share this video with someone who might need a little inspiration today.